next thing we want to do is to do some variable coding, because if we have a look at our data, things like the locations in terms of Ordnance Survey, Eastings and Northings have come in as numbers that are usable as they are, but things like accident severity has come in as a number, 3, 2s and 1s it looks like, and we have to interpret that in some way. And it turns out we've been given also in the same file location we got this file from, we've been given a code book that tells us what the interpretation of these different numbers are. So in this case, round about row 61, for the variable accident severity, we can see that the values 1, 2 and 3 correspond to fatal, serious and slight. So this tells us the severity of the most seriously injured casualty in any given road collision. And we can copy these or just type them in directly. So I'm going to copy these over and I'm going to paste them into a new tab. So if I go down to the bottom, ask for a new tab, I'm going to double click where it says sheet 1 and give it an informative name. I'm going to call it codings, and I'm going to paste the data in here. Now, the new functionality that we really want to introduce here is maybe feels a bit unnecessary at this stage, but it builds up to being an important part of the way all the various functionality we're going to look at interacts. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to click and drag to highlight the data that I've just pasted, and I'm going to go to the insert menu and I'm going to insert a table. Insert table. So I select table. It asks me where the data is for my table, and it guesses it's the data I've just highlighted, and that's correct. So I can say OK, and it creates a table. You'll see we now have a new tab in Excel. It's called Table Design, and I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to give this table a name, and I'm going to call this Severity Codings, and just to make it more informative, I'm going to rename the columns as well. So I'll call this Severity Code, and I'll call this Severity Description. So I've created, in creating a table, I've designated that as a data object within the Excel workbook, and Excel can find that by reference to the table name, and we'll see that when we do a lookup for accident severity. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a new column, and the new column that I'm going to add, I'll just move this out to make it really clear, just widen these fields a little bit. I'm going to add a new column that is called Accident Severity Description, and I just find it so much easier to type the function in with a little bit of help here. I'm going to use something called VLOOKUP, which can cross-reference that number against the table that we've just introduced. So it's asking me, it gives me the reminder, it wants to know what's the value we're trying to look up. So I'll scroll back to the column I'm interested in. It's the one here from accident severity. And the next thing it wants to know is what's the table array that I want to use. And this is where I can refer to that table by the name Severity Codings. So if I start typing, it auto-completes. There's only one table named in this spreadsheet so far, and I'm going to call it Severity Codings. And the last thing I need to do is to supply the offset. So that table could have had any number of columns, and we could take a value from any other column. In our case, we've only got that second column, but we still have to tell it, take the value that's in the second column. The first column of that array is the number, but any other column, in this case the second column, is the value that I want you to look up for me. And if I press return, it does the lookup, and it tells me that the three value that we saw in column I corresponds to a slight So the most seriously injured casualty in that collision had a slight injury. And to get it to autocomplete, I take the mouse. I can do all sorts of things, but the lazy way of doing this, move the cursor so it's over this little box in the bottom right hand corner of my box with the function call in. So, and when I do, I get a small cross, and if I double click, that will fill the entire column up without me having to do any long clicking and dragging. So I get an autofill of the accident severity description. Now, I said that this insert table creates a object within our Excel workbook that is designated as being in a raw data format and is available for use on its own. So the next thing I'm going to do is designate my road collision data as a table. So I click and drag across all the column headings, and again I go to insert table. It asks where the data are, and it guesses it's the columns, all the columns I've just selected. It guesses that my table have headers, and I can confirm that. I say OK. It warns me there's a lot of data there, this is going to take a while, and I'll just tell it that's OK. And it's perhaps not as scary as I thought, and I've got to give this table a name. I'm going to go for stats 19 accidents. That's what I will call that table. And we now have the stats 19 data in table format, and putting it in table format changes the default setup, so we can very quickly apply filters, and we can very quickly sort. I could now, the way this is set up, I could very quickly filter, and it's as slow as the computer is going. I can look at all the collisions where there was a fatally injured casualty, or I could take that filter off. Select all. So last little thing to illustrate is we're going to add another coding, and the suggestion is we take road type. So if we kind of scroll down past all the various local authority lookups, there is a variable here called road type, and this tells us whether roundabout, one-way street, dual carriageway, and so on. So again, I'm going to copy those data. It sometimes might be quicker just to type it in, and I'm going to paste that into my codings worksheet. And again, I'm going to click and drag over the whole of the range of the data, insert table. Again, it's using the ones I've highlighted, so I'll say OK, and I'll give it some informative column names. So I'll call this road type coding and road type description, and we'll also give this an informative name, and we'll call this table road type codings. So again, we're designating this as an object somewhere in Excel. Now, I'm now going to add the VLOOKUP for this, which will behave a little bit differently now that we've designated the whole of our data as being in table format. So I enter the function equals VLOOKUP, and I now want to go over and look for the column that has road type, and I will click on the cell I'm interested in for that row, and you'll see the formula is slightly different to the one we saw before. It's referring to it's got these square brackets and ampersand, and it's saying it's referring to the road type column. How interesting. Add a comma, and I now need to select the lookup array, and remember we called that road type codings, so I start typing. The autocomplete helps. and I just press the tab to get the autocomplete, and a comma, and again I want the second entry, the second column in that data array, and I press return, and this time because we're working in table format and this is the first column to the right of a table, it guesses I want to apply this to the whole table, and that's perhaps partly why the formula for the VLOOKUP is slightly different. If I go to the injuries, it's the severity descriptions, it's referring to them by the column number. If I go to the row types, it's referring to the array. But from the point of view of an analyst, we're now working with arrays. It's just quicker. I didn't need to get the autofill, it just guessed that's what I wanted in that table. And the last thing I have to do is to give this an informative name. So I'm going to call that road type description. And we're done. One last thing that I need to do is make sure I've got that saved. Because remember, I read in from a CSV file. I'm going to lose a lot if I don't save that as an Excel workbook. So if I save that, I'm going to say save as. I'm saving it in my folder, and here's where I now really have to be careful. It will warn me if I do the wrong thing, but I need to tell it, look, save that as an Excel workbook, and I'll use the name that they give me, Road Casualty Statistics Accident 2020. Let's save the file, and we now have data that's been interpreted a little bit. So instead of just numbers where we have to look up, we now have we can now work with slight, serious, single carriageway, dual carriageway, roundabout.